You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We are talking to Michael Sacofsky, who is a 20-year-plus veteran in the field of law. He's a Jerusalem-based attorney dealing primarily in real estate, commercial law, and probate. Michael, I'd like to welcome you to the show.
Okay, thank you. It's nice to join you.
The topic that we're talking about today is dealing with mortgages, and a lot of our listeners are people who would be looking to take out a mortgage or to buy a property. And maybe you could explain what's the normal procedure for people who want to get a mortgage, and maybe you could also follow up with answering, are there mortgage brokers, or do lawyers normally handle this, or do people handle it themselves?
Okay, first we'll start about the process of taking a mortgage. In this country, when you purchase a property, a residential property, it is not conditional on obtaining a mortgage, which means it's important, and imperative actually, that before you actually buy the property to contact a mortgage bank and to see whether in principle you are eligible for a mortgage. In this country actually, other than the sharp distinction to, let's say, the States or England, the mortgages have been very, very well monitored. The maximum you can obtain is to the tune of 60 to 70%. That means you have to bring from your own equity somewhere between 30 to 40% of the purchase of the property. The chances of therefore obtaining a mortgage are high, but nonetheless that's something that should be checked out. Mm-hmm. So the process essentially though begins after you sign the contract. You sign a contract which is, again, as I said, not subject to obtaining a mortgage. You then take the contract of purchase to a mortgage bank, and then a whole process begins. The mortgage bank will give you all kinds of documentation for you to process. They'll want to secure their mortgage at the land registry. These are things which, of course, are done together with your attorney. They will want to bring somebody in to appraise the property to ensure that the property is worth the amount that you've actually purchased it for. It's important to take into account that when a person buys a property, they lend you, the mortgage bank lends you based on their evaluation, not based on the price of the deal.
Why is that?
Simply because the mortgage bank wants to protect their own interests. For example, let's say you buy a property for 1 million shekels. It wouldn't be uncommon for the mortgage bank to evaluate the property to the tune of 850, 900,000 shekels. It'll always come in under the evaluation that you bought it for. If you're taking a mortgage to the tune of 50, 60%, it shouldn't be a problem. It can become more of a problem if you were to try and take a larger mortgage, which anyway the mortgage banks aren't keen to do.
Didn't they just change the rules, in fact, just about a month or two ago related to this? The amount that you could take?
They're constantly checking and talking about bringing down the amount, the percentage they're willing to lend. At this point in time, none of the mortgage banks have put that into effect. And again, it should be pointed out that these constant checks and balances at the Bank of Israel have been very, very useful, because we haven't fallen into the trap that they fell into in the States and in England, where they were borrowing at 100%, 110% of the value of properties. So even if they are talking about it and there are rumors, I consider that to be healthy, because it means they've got their finger on the pulse and they're keeping a certain balance to the entire world of real estate in Israel.
When you said people have to go to the bank to check out whether they could get the mortgage, is this something they do by themselves, or is this something that you would handle normally for a client?
I would say to you, in most cases in this country, people still go themselves to the banks. They're now they're developing a field where people go to brokers who attempt to get them improved terms. And in certain instances, the attorneys will also get involved. I would like to point out something which is very important, and that is all that glitters is not gold. Sometimes terms brought to the client by agents seem to be better in as far as that they're paying on a weekly basis, or a monthly basis, should I say, returns to the bank which are lower. But in actual fact, if you were to look over the 20-year period or 25-year period, right? They're being clobbered somewhere along the line. Sometimes it's better to pay more, right? But in fact, the terms of the mortgage are better. So you have to go cautiously. If you have the time, you can do it yourself. If not, you can have your broker do it or your attorney do it. It's really a factor of time and cost.
We are talking to Michael Sacofsky, a Jerusalem-based lawyer who deals heavily in the real estate business, and we're talking today about mortgages. And one of the things I'd like to focus on a little bit now, as my day job is a financial advisor. I'm not always on the radio, and I deal a lot with talking with people about risk and the risks of their investments. In fact, a lot of people go to our website, which I will note again is www.profile-financial.com in order to learn a lot about risks. But one of the things we don't discuss on the website is the risks related to mortgages in real estate. Could you comment on that?
I think one of the important things when you take a mortgage is to take a balanced approach. You know, some people say to me, well, what kind of mortgage should I take? Should I take a dollar-linked mortgage, a euro-linked, a shekel linked to the building index or to the living index? Should I take it linked to this index? And I think that what's very, very important with these things is to have a very balanced approach. In other words, the way I myself have done it is to always hedge. In other words, if you're borrowing, let's say, 1 million shekels, I would suggest to people to borrow part of it linked to one index and another part to another index, because Murphy's Law will always tell you, although this may not be very scientific, that if you opt for one, that's where you're going to be shafted. If, however, you take a more balanced approach and you take a hedged approach, you might find that you'll come out in a better position.
If someone has no connection, though, let's say to euros, is there a reason for him to take a euro mortgage?
No. I would say most people who are living in this country and their income is in shekel, they should take their mortgage in one form or another in shekel. But as I said, there are different kind of shekel mortgages. But I definitely would consider, if you are earning, let's say, in euros, to take some of your mortgage in euros. So yes, if you're earning in this country in shekels, I would go the shekel route, no question.
A lot of people are trying to decide from between one bank or the other, and they go in and they just sort of get swept away in the whirlwind of things that they don't understand. Are there certain things that people should look for in choosing the right bank, or is it just simply a question of who gives you the lowest price?
No, I don't think it's just a question of who gives you the lowest price. And by the way, it's another factor which I think you would agree with, Doug, is you need to take a long-term approach to this as well. Sometimes, for example, you can take a 25-year loan, and it appears that your monthly returns are very, very low. But if you're anything beyond, let's say, for example, 15 years, you're really, really paying a high return in interest. I would say the optimum time, if somebody can afford it, is to try and limit the years of a mortgage to 15. Anything above 15 years is really going to cost you a lot of money. With regards to which banks to go to, all banks, including your own personal bank, will offer you mortgages. From my experience, the large mortgage banks, such as Bank Tvachot Mizrahi, and Bank Hapoalim Mishkan and Bank of Jerusalem, these banks who specialize in mortgages, will ease the passage, the technical and bureaucratic passage, which doesn't sound that important, but it really is, because otherwise these other banks who will offer you mortgages really will put you through the ringer, and I don't think they always have the expertise to give you the larger picture. They're looking just to say, oh, well, why don't you just pay a lower rate of X, and you'll realize 3 years down the line that you're kind of locked into something that, with hindsight, it's not something you would have done. I think the larger banks can definitely give you better guidance.
Talking about locked versus, I guess, not being as locked, in the States, many people were used to getting fixed mortgages. And here that seems to be much less common. Is there a reason, or is it a possibility to get a fixed mortgage here, or it just doesn't happen?
It's not very fashionable, and when the banks do it, it's at a very high rate of interest. At this point in time, people don't elect to take those kind of mortgages. They're not that available, frankly. So I would say to you that, in principle, it's a nice idea, but it's not that available in Israel. And when it is something at a rate which is prohibitive.
Are there overseas lenders who would lend into Israel, or it just doesn't happen that way?
Very, very difficult for people to borrow money. You do have, for example, in England and in the States, branches of different banks like Bank Mizrahi and so on and so forth in England or in New York, and they will work together with a local bank of their, from their own bank in Israel. But you couldn't, for example, go to the Chase or one of these other banks and borrow money against an Israeli property. They simply won't do it. Although, frankly, if you ask me, they're better protected than all the deals they've done over there.
So it would seem. Let me just wrap up with one last question, which is that the concept of a reverse mortgage is beginning to get some traction here in Israel, which is where people get money from the house that they own. The bank gives them money, and oftentimes elderly people will do this in order to try and get some liquidity out of their home. Is this popular? Is this a good idea?
Really, it's a factor of cost. Obviously, if you take a mortgage, a reverse mortgage, you certainly are not going to get the terms that you would if you're buying a property straight off the bat. The terms are considerably higher. Obviously, the older you are, the risks increase. The banks will also demand higher rates of insurance on the monies they're lending. So again, it's a question of crunching the numbers. From what I have seen to date, I think you have to think very, very carefully before you do that. If you're younger and you want to, for example, do a renovation and you need to borrow a relatively modest amount of money, which is something you can control, and you know that you're going to pay a premium on the price, and it's still cheaper than if you were to take a line of credit from your bank, that's one thing. If you're older, I would think twice, and I myself have advised people to be very, very cautious on that front.
Okay. Michael Sacofsky, thank you very much. Michael is a real estate lawyer, also deals in commercial law and probate here in Jerusalem. Could you just tell our listeners how they might be able to contact you if they have further questions?
Frankly, the best way to contact me is via my office. My office is based in Jerusalem on Ramban 11. My numbers are 02-567-0755, and email address is sacofsky@netvision.net.il. It would be a pleasure.
Okay. Thanks again, Michael Sacofsky.
My pleasure.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt show.